Rhonda Jacobs reviewed Ellen Maloney. Imagine this. You have just won $10 million in the lotto. Congratulations. You just ate the most wonderful, warm chocolate brownie ever cooked. You've just had sex. And you have just completed all three at the same moment. Congratulations to you, too. In these conditions, our brains generate neurotransmitters, which give us intense feelings of energy, excitement, and enjoyment. And without such molecules within us, we would not experience such wonderful emotions. Instead, consider this: you have just been fired. You are about to sit an exam. You have depression. In certain instances, however, our brains generate distinct chemicals, causing us to feel agitated and apprehensive. The highs and lows of life are governed by our emotions and brain chemistry. This crucial organ within each of us regulates everything we feel, think, and do. However, as a biologist, I've always found it difficult to believe that every emotion, thought, and action we have is governed by a 3-pound, soggy mass of cells within our heads until I realized that this may not be the truth. The story I'd like to share with you today reveals a fascinating new discovery in our understanding of human physiology. We all have a second brain, another organ in our bodies that controls as many of our physical and mental functions as the brain in our heads, and which may be the key link between modern disease epidemics around the world, from obesity to cardiovascular disease, and possibly even mental health. But before, let me give you a small introduction to this narrative. I'd like to tell you a little about my background. I was raised in a family of psychologists. My mother is a clinical psychologist, my father is a psychology professor at a university, and my sister holds a PhD in psychology. So when it came to attending university, I wanted to study something new. I had heard enough about the brain and how it functioned at home, so I wanted to learn something new. I considered my interests and discovered that I had a strong interest in cuisine from a young age. I enjoyed eating the food. So I chose to study human nutrition. This was fantastic because I got to learn about food, how it affects our bodies, how it can contribute to disease, and, most importantly, how we can use it to fight and prevent disease. This story begins in 1845 with the birth of a fascinating small child in Russia who grew into an outstanding man yet was overlooked by history and medicine. Ilya Mechnikov was attracted by everything in nature, and by the age of 8, he was collecting notes on every living thing in his thriving backyard. He got so skilled at research that he identified the role of phagocytes, which are vital cells in our immune systems, for which he received the Nobel Prize in 1908. But it was his science after receiving the Nobel Prize that contributed even more to our understanding of human health, as told via a story of discovery, mortality, and self-experimentation. Look, everyone in this room has something in common. We all spent the first 9 months of our lives in our mother's womb. And this was essentially a sterile environment, with no other living creatures besides you. However, as you emerged into this world, you were blanketed in an invisible layer of germs, unfriendly microbes from your mother's birth canal. And these bacteria grew to become our microbiota, also known as the microbiome, a 3-pound invisible organ inside your big intestine that weighs the same as the brain. This unseen organ has grown so much that bacterial cells now account for 90% of your body's cells, with only 10% being human cells. So you're more bacterial than human. Your gut microbiome is as diverse as the Amazon rainforest. There are many of species, each with a different function. And your health is heavily reliant on the life and vibrancy of this rainforest. Your gut bacteria digest specific foods, generate critical vitamins and hormones, respond to medications and infections, and regulate blood sugar and cholesterol levels. This means that the bacteria in your intestines can greatly reduce your risk of diseases ranging from obesity to diabetes, and possibly even osteoporosis. They are engaged in almost every process in your body. They function almost like a second brain. Ilya Mechnikov may have worked it out himself in 1892. He lived in France, namely Paris, during the time when a horrific cholera epidemic had killed hundreds of people. Naturally, as a scientist, he felt that the best way to investigate this was to drink cholera broth himself. Surprisingly, he did not become sick. So, as a genuine scientist, he needed to enlarge his sample size, so he asked a colleague to do the same. This person did not become sick either. But when he encouraged another coworker to do the same, the unfortunate person became gravely ill and almost died. Mechnikov discovered that certain kinds of bacteria from the human intestines encouraged and accelerated cholera growth, while others inhibited it. He later asserted that our gut microbiota, or gut bacteria, were critical for human health and that the proper balance of germs inside us may help prevent disease. However, the prevalent belief at the time was that the human stomach was a dangerous repository of toxins. In patients with gastrointestinal discomfort, surgeons have even begun removing entire sections of the human intestine. After Mechnikov died in 1916, his views about the benefits of gut microorganisms were lost. Antibiotics were found a decade later and quickly became widely utilized. C-sections became commonplace. Diets were westernized. We conducted a war on bacteria and spent a century trying to eradicate them, transforming our gut rainforests into barren wastelands. This Nobel Prize winner's ideas were lost over time. Some of the consequences of this were recently discovered. Right now, 1 in every 3 infants in America is born via C-section, which means they do not receive the initial inoculum or bacterial coating that evolution has designed to be present in the mother's birth canal. Instead, they are first coated with other germs on the skin or in a hospital setting, which has been linked to a 25% greater risk of obesity, asthma, immunological deficiencies, and inflammatory bowel disease later in life. Fortunately, we've just recognized that we need to rebuild our relationship with gut microorganisms in order to improve our physical health. However, we continue to underestimate their importance as our second brains. And this is something I'm exploring. And I discovered this initially through the fascinating narrative of a mouse. When mice are infected by the germ Toxoplasma gondii, an interesting thing happens: they lose their fear of cats. In fact, they develop an attraction to cats. In essence, they go crazy and, sadly for them, typically end up as cat food. As a result, the microbe ingested by this animal takes control of its brain, altering its thoughts and behaviors. So, by delving deep into the intestinal jungle of bacteria in our intestines, we've made some incredible discoveries that will forever change our appreciation for bacteria. Our stomachs and brains are physically and biochemically related in a variety of ways. First and foremost, our intestines are physically linked to our brain via the vagus nerve, which transmits signals in both directions. Interestingly, even if this is severed, our intestines may still function normally without a connection to the brain, implying that they have a thought of their own. Second, our brains are made up of 100 billion neurons that constantly send messages telling our bodies how to function and behave. Interestingly, our stomachs contain 100 million neurons. Third, our microbiomes are the focal point of our immune systems, so any disruption here can elicit modest immunological reactions across the body, which, if persistent, can have an impact on brain health. Finally, do we remember our chocolate-eating, lottery-winning womanizer from the front row? He demonstrated to us that neurotransmitters are substances that can alter how we think, behave, and feel. Most of these neurotransmitters, including serotonin, nature's antidepressant, are created in our gut, with fewer than 10% produced in our brains. This means that the microorganisms inside your body may influence how you think and behave. Has stress ever interfered with your insides? Did you ever get a gut feeling? Or are there butterflies in your stomach? You may want to reconsider it. So, despite my naive hesitation as a teenager, I've started studying not one, but 2 brains. At the APC Microbiome Institute in Ireland, we're fascinated by the link between our stomachs and our brains, and we're looking into how our modern diets and lifestyles affect this gut-brain relationship, as well as how we can design interventions to target the microbiota in order to prevent and treat chronic diseases. For example, we've demonstrated that the sorts of lipids you consume throughout your life can significantly alter the types of bacteria that choose to live in your intestines. Furthermore, we've demonstrated that feeding specific strains of bacteria can improve cognition, stress behavior, and stress hormone levels in animals. and, along with a number of other researchers across the world, we found lists of foods that can work as prebiotics, or meals that stimulate the growth of beneficial bacteria in our intestines. It fascinates me that our health is so dependent not only on fueling ourselves, but also on feeding other living microbes within us. This suggests that future techniques to target and cure chronic diseases, including brain health, may rely on targeting or feeding our gut microbiomes. As it turns out, Ilya Mechnikov might have understood this himself. See, he married earlier in his life, but his wife had tuberculosis and died. The tension and trauma caused Mechnikov to overdose on opium. Fortunately, he lived. He then remarried, and when his second wife contracted typhoid illness, he injected himself with a lethal tick-borne disease. Fortunately, he survived again. Only after this did Mechnikov begin to study and appreciate the microbiome. He proceeded to Paris to work at the Pasteur Institute, where he hypothesized that the appropriate balance of microbes in the gut may help prevent disease, and he wrote a series of books and lectures on how to achieve this and live a longer life. Despite the stress and mental upheaval he had endured in his previous life, he spent the remainder of his life dedicated and obsessed with discovering ways to extend human life. He began examining an interesting group of people in Eastern Europe who had exceptionally long lives, and he discovered that they all drank bacterial fermented milk on a daily basis, which he suggested contributed to their longevity. Interestingly, he began drinking this bacterial fermented milk himself and appeared to live a healthy life free of the stress and mental turmoil he had experienced previously. Maybe it was just coincidence. He described his stay in Paris as the happiest of his life. However, Mechnikov died in France in 1916, at the age of 71. At the time, the average French life expectancy was 40 years. As humans, we must develop a greater appreciation for the bacteria that live within us. The accidental war we've conducted against microbes over the last century has resulted in bacterial extinction and an epidemic of modern plagues. I'm here on a Fulbright to study how we may rebuild our relationship with bacteria and use this to prevent and treat chronic diseases. But I believe we all have the responsibility and ability to follow in Ilya Mechnikov's footsteps. Not only did he want to resurrect his scientific results that had been forgotten over time, but he also wanted to prolong healthy human life. We can all help the lives of microorganisms by educating ourselves on the risks and advantages of C-sections, limiting unnecessary antibiotic usage, and adopting a gut-friendly diet and lifestyle. So, imagine this: imagine you've just eaten chocolate, won the jackpot, taken an exam, or been fired. Imagine a hidden organ that governs your thoughts, emotions, behavior, and health. Ilya Mechnikov strived to preserve not only healthy human life, but also healthy microbiological life. I believe we can all contribute to this worthwhile fight for our own health, as well as the health of future generations, by mending the interaction between microbes and humans. There's some food for thinking. Thank you very much.